Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be taking a look at the life and work of Irvin Yalom.
One of the titans of psychotherapy.
That's right. And specifically, we'll be examining his autobiography, Becoming Myself.
Really a remarkable work, just in terms of its honesty and openness.
Absolutely. It's a compelling read,
Yeah.
It's not just dates and facts. He really goes into his own personal struggles,
His vulnerabilities.
his insights.
Right, and that's what makes it so fascinating. So we thought we'd kind of take a journey through this book together and pull out some of the most, I don't know, thought-provoking or maybe even surprising elements.
Sounds great.
So let's start at the beginning. One of the earliest memories he shares is this incident where he, as a child, he calls this girl Alice measles.
Uh-huh.
And, it seems like such a small thing, but it becomes this sort of recurring dream for him, filled with regret.
Right.
He even gets confronted by her father.
Oh, wow.
But then later, Alice herself invites him to play. So it's this really interesting mix of emotions. It is. It speaks to his early capacity for introspection. Even as a child, he's recognizing the impact of his words. But it also makes you wonder about these seemingly insignificant actions and how they can stay with us subconsciously.
I mean, I've definitely had those moments where something I said or did years ago will just pop into my head, and I'm like, oh, why did I do that?
Absolutely.
So his description of growing up in poverty is really stark.
Yeah.
Drunks, roaches, rats, all part of daily life. And then you add in the anti-Semitic encounters. It's no wonder he felt out of place.
It's a harsh reality, and I think it's important to acknowledge the impact those early environments can have on our sense of self.
But there's this really interesting contrast, because later in life, he learns that someone considered him beautiful as a child. And I just keep thinking about that. How that one little piece of information must have shifted something for him.
It's incredible, Ray. It shows the power of even a small positive affirmation, especially when it challenges those deep-seated beliefs we have about ourselves.
It's like a little glimmer of light in all that darkness.
Exactly.
He also talks about how certain encounters would trigger these long-forgotten memories, like reconnecting with his childhood chess buddy, Jerry. Suddenly he's remembering all these details about their games, even about buying used astronomy books to try to impress girls.
Oh, that's interesting.
Makes you wonder what else is buried in there.
It's fascinating how memory works. It's not linear. It's more like a web of associations. And sometimes a particular person, a place, a smell can unlock all of these forgotten pathways.
Definitely makes you want to pay more attention to those little triggers, doesn't it?
It does.
So let's move on to his family dynamics, particularly his relationship with his mother.
Okay.
He describes a real lack of warmth. He talks about being blamed for his father's heart attack, and then even feeling a sense of relief when he finally leaves for medical school.
Wow. Those are some really loaded emotions to unpack.
Absolutely. So I'm curious what you make of that. You
Yeah.
know, what impact do you think those early interactions with his mother had on him?
Well, I think it's safe to say that our relationships with our parents, especially in those early years, really do lay the foundation for how we see the world, how we relate to others. And I imagine Yalom's experiences with his mother played a significant role in his fascination with human behavior.
Makes sense. Now his father decides to convert their grocery store into a liquor store,
Oh.
which brings a whole new set of experiences.
Wow.
He talks about encountering these colorful characters, robberies. He even mentions an incident where his father stopped him from fighting back against a racist bully.
That's a tough one. I mean, on the one hand, you can understand the father's instinct to protect his son in a potentially dangerous situation. But on the other hand, it might have inadvertently sent the message that it's better to stay silent in the face of injustice.
Right.
Makes you think about the long-term impact of those kinds of moments.
It does, and I think that's one of the things Yellen does so well. He presents these complex situations, and he doesn't shy away from the difficult questions.
He really doesn't.
Now, it's interesting to me that throughout all this, through all the hardship and the challenges, there's this recurring theme of chess.
Oh, really?
He plays with his family, he competes in high school, he teaches his own sons, and later on he even describes memory as his invincible opponent in chess.
That's a powerful image.
It is, isn't it?
It speaks to the challenges we face as we age, but also to the resilience of the human mind. Even as our cognitive abilities might decline, there's still this drive to engage, to learn, to challenge ourselves.
And chess provides that perfect outlet.
It does.
So when he moves to Blagden Terrace, it's like this complete shift in environment.
Right.
Suddenly he's surrounded by peace and safety, which I'm sure was a welcome change.
I bet.
And it's during his high school years that he decides on psychiatry.
Interesting. What drew him to that particular field?
Well, he had a deep love for literature,
Oh, okay.
and he saw this connection between literature and the human psyche.
I see. So it wasn't this, straight path from wanting to be a doctor to
Right.
specializing in mental health. It was much more nuanced.
Exactly. And I think that speaks to something really important. Sometimes our passions, even those that seem unrelated to our eventual career paths, can actually hold clues to our true calling.
Hmm. I like that.
Now, his undergraduate years, he describes them as relentlessly grim.
Um,
But then when he goes to medical school in Boston, it's like this whole new chapter opens up. He's calmer, he's sleeping better. It's almost as if he finally found his element.
it's amazing how transformative it can be when we find work that truly resonates with us.
It is. Now, there's this
Yeah.
amusing little anecdote about a poker game at Mount Sinai during his internship,
Okay.
which gives you a glimpse into the lives of these practicing physicians.
Mm-hmm.
But the internship itself was brutal. Long hours, very little sleep. And on top of that, his wife, Marilyn, is pursuing her doctorate at the same time.
Wow. Quite a power couple.
They were. And, it was quite unconventional for that era.
It was. It makes you realize how far we've come in terms of gender equality, but also how much further we still have to go.
That's a good point. So he goes on to describe his experience with psychoanalysis with this therapist, Olive Smith, in Baltimore. And he's pretty blunt about it. He says it was unhelpful and that it taught him how not to do therapy.
Interesting.
Coming from someone who had become such a prominent figure in the field, that's a pretty bold statement.
It is, but I think it highlights the importance of finding the right therapist for you.
Therapist-patient fit.
Exactly, because therapy isn't one size fits all, and sometimes it takes a bit of trial and error to find that perfect match.
Right. And speaking of finding the right approach,
Yeah.
there's this really powerful story about Sarah, a mute patient he connected with.
Okay.
And the way he connected with her is by just talking to her every day, sharing his thoughts, his feelings, even just mundane things like the weather.
Mm,
And then one day she kisses him.
wow. That's an unexpected turn of events.
It is. And while he does end up treating her with a new tranquilizer and she does recover, it's what she says about his presence that really sticks with me. She says it was her bread and butter. Like it was essential for her healing.
That's beautiful. It really speaks to the power of just being present for someone, listening without judgment, offering that genuine human connection.
I think sometimes we underestimate the impact of simply showing up for someone.
I agree.
So from there, his career path takes him to Patuxent Institution,
Oh, wow.
where he's working with sexual offenders.
Mm.
And he starts writing articles about group therapy for this population. He even tackles the topic of voyeurism.
Which was pretty taboo at the time.
It was, and he does it in such a clever way. He uses the story of the original Peeping Tom, the one who peeked at Lady Godiva, as an introduction to his article.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to engage readers.
It is.
Storytelling can be such a powerful tool, especially when you're dealing with complex or sensitive topics.
Absolutely. So his time in Hawaii leading encounter groups proves to be pretty transformative for him. He develops a new appreciation for life outside of work. He even starts a poker game that lasts for 3 decades.
3 decades, that's dedication.
It is. And wouldn't you know, he finds another chess partner in Hawaii.
So chess continues to be this thread throughout his life.
It does. It's like this constant source of intellectual stimulation and connection.
I love that.
Well, I think we'll pause here for now. There's so much more to uncover in Yalom's journey, and I'm really looking forward to delving deeper into his evolution as a therapist and exploring those profound existential themes that really permeate his work.
Me too. This is fascinating.
When Yalom lands at Stanford, it's interesting because he actually feels uneasy working at the VA hospital.
You wouldn't expect that.
Not really, but he eventually finds his groove in the outpatient department, focusing on group therapy. And get this, he starts providing summaries of each group session to the participants.
Summaries, like
So
his
there's
own
a-
observations.
Exactly.
That's pretty unconventional, isn't it?
It is. But it shows how much he believed in transparency, authenticity. Like he was saying, hey, look, I'm not this detached expert. We're all in this together.
And how did the participants respond to that?
Well, he found it incredibly effective. He actually continued doing it throughout his career.
So it really fostered a sense of trust and vulnerability within the group.
It did. And it reinforces this idea that connection is at the heart of effective therapy.
Right. It's not just about techniques or interventions. It's about creating a safe space for people to be themselves, to connect with each other.
Absolutely. So his experiences leading an encounter group at Lake Arrowhead further solidified this emphasis on the here and now.
The here and now.
It's about focusing on what's happening in the present moment
Mhm.
rather than dwelling on the past, and encouraging people to take responsibility for their choices, their actions right here, right now.
That makes sense. It's empowering people to create their own meaning.
Exactly. So he also gets involved in a gender reassignment project at Stanford, which sadly gets shut down due to complications.
It was a different time, wasn't it?
It was. But it shows Yalom's willingness to explore these uncharted territories, even if they were controversial.
And it reminds us that societal norms are constantly evolving. What might have been considered radical or taboo then is now much more widely accepted.
That's a good point.
Hmm.
Now let's talk about those existential themes that are so central to Yalom's work.
Okay.
He's very open about his lack of religious beliefs, and he says it hasn't really impacted his life or his therapeutic approach.
Which is interesting because a lot of people associate existentialism with religion or spirituality.
They do. But Yalom provides this framework for grappling with those big questions.
Hmm.
Life, death, meaning without relying on any particular dogma.
So it's accessible to a wider audience.
Exactly. So he's living through the cultural upheaval of the 1960s students wearing sandals and growing their hair out, marijuana at faculty parties, changing sexual norms. It was a wild time.
It was a time of great change and transformation. And even Yalom, loosens up a bit.
He does. Which I think reminds us that even the most brilliant minds are shaped by the world around them.
We're all products of our time.
So he takes a year-long sabbatical in London with his family,
Nice.
immerses himself in group therapy studies at the Tavistock Clinic. And he even shares this funny anecdote about walking past General Charles de Gaulle's former mansion and fantasizing about buying it.
I love that. It shows his playful side.
It does. And it makes you wonder, what would you do with a historic mansion?
Oh, the possibilities.
He also recounts an encounter with Ernest Hemingway's unpublished letters.
Wow.
And you can just sense this fascination with peeking into a writer's inner world.
There's always that allure, isn't there? Trying to understand the creative process, the mind behind the words.
So Yalom then starts to grapple with writing about existential themes himself, particularly death.
Mm.
And he describes this recurring dream he has about his deceased family members.
Dreams can be so powerful.
They can. And this one feels particularly symbolic, like he's confronting his own mortality in a way.
I see. And it's around this time that he begins therapy sessions with Yalom.
He does. And he takes the unusual step of recording the sessions to enhance his focus, which is pretty ahead of his time.
It is. But it shows his dedication to the process.
It does, and it's during this period that he publishes Existential Psychotherapy, a groundbreaking work that really emphasizes the importance of facing our own mortality.
Which a lot of people try to avoid.
They do. But Yalom argues that it's precisely in confronting our own finitude that we can find true meaning in life.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. Now, wanting to explore these ideas further, he attends a Vipassana retreat in Bodh Gaya.
Interesting.
He experiences firsthand the challenges of the lotus position, the strict discipline. He even witnesses someone being expelled for laughing.
Expelled for laughing.
Can you imagine? But it just shows the intensity of these retreats.
It does, and it reminds us that there are many different paths to self-discovery.
Right, what works for one person might not work for another. Now, his travels in India and Thailand provide some welcome comic relief.
Oh, good.
He talks about bribing train ticket sellers, accidentally ordering incredibly spicy food. It's a good reminder not to take ourselves too seriously.
It's good to laugh, especially when you're traveling in unfamiliar territory.
He keeps pushing the boundaries of group therapy.
Mm.
He encounters resistance in Japan where self-disclosure isn't as readily embraced.
Makes sense. Cultures have different norms.
Right. And he develops a whole new approach for inpatient wards addressing those unique challenges.
So he's constantly adapting and refining his methods.
He is. And then his literary journey takes an interesting turn. He publishes Love's Executioner.
A collection of therapy tales, right?
Right. And he gets a negative review in the New York Times.
Ouch.
But here's the thing. It actually sparks this outpouring of support from young therapists.
Really?
They connected with his honesty,
Yeah.
his vulnerability, his willingness to share his struggles.
I can see that. It makes him more relatable, more human.
Exactly. And then he writes a novel, When Nietzsche Wept.
Wait, the philosopher Nietzsche?
The one and only.
What's the novel about?
Well, he imagines Nietzsche as a patient of Breuer.
Fascinating.
It's this brilliant merging of history, psychology, fiction. And he even jokes about using training wheels while writing fiction since he was so used to nonfiction.
I love that.
But the central idea of the novel is really profound. Breuer eventually asks Nietzsche to become his therapist.
Wow, what a twist.
It is. And it highlights this idea that therapy is a two-way street.
Right. Both the therapist and the patient have something to offer.
Exactly. So he reads an early draft to his wife, Marilyn, and she's immediately hooked.
Always a good sign.
It is. And it speaks to the power of the story itself.
Absolutely. Now, throughout the autobiography, we also get these glimpses into Yalom's personal life.
We do.
His marriage to Marilyn, their shared love of writing, raising their 4 children in California.
It's really beautiful to see how he finds this balance,
Yeah.
between these deep existential questions and the everyday joys and challenges of family life.
It is. And his relationship with Marilyn is particularly inspiring.
It is. They're each other's first readers, constantly supporting and encouraging each other's work.
A true partnership.
Absolutely. And Marilyn goes on to have a successful writing career herself, focusing on women's history and cultural studies.
What a power couple.
They really were. Now, he also shares this funny story about a family photo being removed from Facebook for indecency
What? Why?
because their daughter-in-law was discreetly breastfeeding her grandson in the picture.
Oh, wow.
It's just a funny little anecdote.
Yeah.
But it also speaks to the changing norms around breastfeeding and social media censorship.
It does. And he also talks about the experience of having a film made about his life.
He does. And he admits to feeling some mixed emotions about it, exposing his personal story in such a public way. But ultimately, he's proud to see his family portrayed on screen.
It's a big decision to let someone else tell your story.
It is. And he's very honest about his regrets,
Yeah.
particularly wishing he had spent more individual time with each of his children.
I think that's something a lot of working parents can relate to.
I think so, too. Now, even in his 80s, Yalom continues to learn and grow. He tells this amazing story about inadvertently providing therapy to an oligarch on a private jet in Moscow.
No way.
It's true. And it just shows that therapy can happen anywhere, anytime.
It does. And it speaks to his ability to connect with people from all walks of life.
He also shares this really touching story about a man seeking absolution for his role in his sister's anorexia. And it highlights this profound need for forgiveness, both of ourselves and of others.
Forgiveness is such a powerful force. It can be so difficult, but it's ultimately so liberating.
So in his current practice, he's focusing on time-limited therapy. Working with patients, he believes he can help within a year.
Interesting. Why that approach?
Well, he's very upfront about it. He acknowledges the realities of aging and the importance of setting healthy boundaries.
That makes sense. It's about knowing your limits and making sure you're able to provide the best possible care for your patients.
Exactly. And as he's wrapping up his autobiography, he expresses some uncertainty about writing future books.
It's like he's grappling with endings, legacies, the passage of time.
He is. And it's a reminder that even someone as accomplished as Yalom still has doubts and uncertainties.
We're all human.
We are. It's remarkable, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
How even with all these profound existential questions he's exploring, Yalom still finds so much solace and grounding in his personal life.
It is. His marriage to Marilyn, their shared love of writing, raising their 4 children in California, it really adds another dimension to his story.
It does. It shows that you can be grappling with these big ideas about life and death and still find joy and meaning in the everyday moments.
Absolutely. And his relationship with Marilyn is particularly inspiring. They're each other's first readers, constantly supporting and championing each other's work.
And Marilyn goes on to have a very successful writing career herself, focusing on women's history and cultural studies.
It's a real testament to their partnership, that they were able to nurture their individual passions while still maintaining such a strong bond.
They were a true power couple.
Yeah.
And he tells this funny anecdote about a family photo being removed from Facebook for indecency.
Indecency? What was so indecent about a family photo?
Well, it turns out their daughter-in-law was discreetly breastfeeding her grandson in the picture.
Oh, wow.
And he also talks about the experience of having a film made about his life, admitting to feeling some mixed emotions, about having his personal story out there for the whole world to see. But ultimately, he's proud of how his family is portrayed.
It's a vulnerable thing to do, to allow someone else to tell your story.
It is. And he's very open about his regrets,
Yeah.
especially wishing he had devoted more individual time to each of his children.
I think that's a common regret for a lot of parents, especially those with demanding careers.
It is. It's that constant struggle to find the balance between work and family.
Right. And it's never perfect.
No, it's not. Now, even in his 80s, Yalom is still learning and growing. He tells this amazing story about inadvertently providing therapy to an oligarch on a private jet in Moscow.
You can't make this stuff up.
You really can't.
Yeah.
And it just highlights this idea that therapy can happen anywhere, at any time.
It also speaks to his ability to connect with people from all walks of life.
It does. And he shares this really touching story about a man seeking absolution for his role in his sister's anorexia.
That's a heavy one.
It is. But it speaks to this profound need for forgiveness, forgiving ourselves, forgiving others.
Forgiveness is so essential for healing.
It is. So in his current practice, he's focusing on time-limited therapy, working with patients he believes he can help within a year.
And why that approach?
Well, he's very upfront about it. He says it's partly due to his age. He's setting boundaries, but it's also about being realistic about what he can offer.
It makes sense. You have to take care of yourself in order to take care of others.
Exactly. And as he's wrapping up his autobiography, he expresses some uncertainty about writing future books.
It's almost like he's coming to terms with the idea of endings, legacies, the fact that time marches on.
It is. And I think it's something we all grapple with at some point in our lives.
Okay.
So as we conclude this deep dive into the world of Irvin Yalom, I'm curious, what are some of the biggest takeaways for you? What really stood out?
His curiosity, for sure. His relentless pursuit of understanding.
It's evident in everything he does, isn't it?
It is. From his early fascination with literature to his groundbreaking work in therapy to his ventures into fiction, he's always asking questions, always exploring.
And maybe that's the greatest lesson he offers us.
To never stop learning. To embrace the unknown.
To approach life with a sense of wonder and curiosity.
Exactly.
Well, it's been a fascinating journey, hasn't it?
It has.
I want to thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the life and work of Irvin Yalom.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to explore his books, his ideas, his incredible life story.
You won't be disappointed.
Until next time, may you continue to seek, question, and grow.
And above all, may you approach life with a sense of compassion and understanding.